Continue. You record the last one permission.
Mr. Walz, you are mute.
Thank you. That's a good, nice detail. So, in that case, His Excellencies, the Honorable Cabinet Ministers in Nepal, members of the Parliament in Nepal, dear Ms. Bettina Stark-Watzinger, Mr. Ram Pratap Mata, and dear panelists and dear ladies and gentlemen. Once again, namaste, guten Abend and good evening. And as the head of the Friedrich-Naumann Foundation for Freedom and head of the regional office of Hessen and Rheinland-Pfalz, it is my pleasure and my honor to welcome you to participate in this online event titled Nepal, Himalayan Country in Crisis. The Friedrich-Naumann Foundation is a German political foundation that promotes liberal values and is mainly working in the areas of good governance, rule of law, education, and the ordoliberal school of free market economy. We achieve our goals by political consultancy, political dialogue, and civic education. Presently, the Foundation's regional office in South Asia, headed by Dr. Carsten Klein, is exploring opportunities to expand the Foundation's work into Nepal with our partner organization, the Samriddhi Foundation. We are also exploring to foster deeper relations between Germany and Nepal. Sandwiched between the emerging superpowers India and China, Nepal has witnessed a long struggle for democracy. And presently, Nepal faces possibly the greatest COVID-19 crisis in the world. The days ahead are challenging as the Nepalese people have two battles to fight, one for democracy and the other for their very life. In today's event, our panelists will deliberate on the aftermath of the COVID situation, the challenges faced by the public administration and the political system in Nepal, and the panelists will also discuss on the political conflicts going on in Nepal. We hope that by this online event, we will enhance the visibility of Nepal within Germany and among the German public. Before I give the floor to the next speaker, I would like to take you to a trip to Nepal, even though it's only a virtual one, and present you a 2-minute video which shows the amazing features and beautiful landscape of Nepal and its people. The video is produced by Govinda Sivakoti. He is Kathmandu-based independent filmmaker and photographer, and his works are nationally and internationally recognized by different film festivals. And please allow me to share my screen to show you this video. So I hope you enjoyed this quick tour to Nepal. And ladies and gentlemen, I now have the pleasure to introduce to you our first speaker, Mr. Ram Pratap Thapa. Good evening, welcome. He is the Honorary Consul General for Nepal in Germany and is also the president of the Deutsch-Nepalesische Gesellschaft in Germany. I would like to make a special thanks to Mr. Thapa for his support in communicating this event to a wider audience. Mr. Thapa, we are all interested to hear your opening remarks. So you're also still muted, Mr. Thapa.
Sorry. So now it's better. So yes, dear host, Dr. Klein, distinguished honorable guests, speakers of today's virtual program, welcome to you all and namaste to all of you and listeners. This is my great pleasure as President of German-Nepal Friendship Association to join this online meeting, especially for taking special concern of my native country, a tiny Himalayan state. I know the FNF has helped Nepal in crucial times in the past. This meeting today will be the first where I am participating directly and after a long time. I am sure this meeting will again help us to bring the nation a bit forward. With this, dear ladies and gentlemen, I would like to save my other words and prefer to listen valuable statements and words of distinguished experts from India, from Nepal, and of course from Germany. And I wish today a lovely time and together with you all. Thank you. Namaste. We see us later.
Thank you, Mr. Thapa, for your opening remarks, and thank you very much for your support for this event. Ladies and gentlemen, I also have the pleasure to introduce to you our keynote speaker, Ms. Bettina Stark-Watzinger. Ms. Stark-Watzinger is a German politician of the Liberal Party, the FDP, and since 2017, member of the German Bundestag. Ms. Stark-Watzinger has been a member of the board of the Friedrich-Naumann Foundation for Freedom since 2018. From 2015 to 2019, she was the General Secretary of the FDP Hessen and has been elected as new state chair of the FDP Hessen. She's been a member of the FDP Federal Executive Committee since 2017, and at the beginning of 2020, she was elected parliamentary director of the FDP parliamentary group. Ms. Stark-Watzinger, it's an honor to have you with us, and please let us hear your keynote.
Thank you very much. Good evening from Berlin. It's actually an honor for me to be here and follow the discussion tonight. Your Excellencies, Honorable Cabinet Ministers from Nepal, Honorable Members of Parliament from Nepal, Honorable Ambassador Mr. Khadka, Honorable Consul General of Nepal in Germany, Mr. Ram Pratap Thapa, dear Dr. Carsten Klein, panelists, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to thank Mr. Patrick Walz for his kind introductory words. And as I already said, it's really a pleasure as board member of the Friedrich-Naumann Foundation for Freedom to be here this evening among this distinguished panel. Esteemed Member of Parliament, Mr. Kagan Thapa, it is indeed our great honor to have you here today. Thank you, Mrs. Suhasini Haidar, Dr. Daval Rana, and Dr. Vijay Dakal to be part of this panel. The title of tonight's event is Nepal, Himalayan Country in Crisis. When I think of Nepal, and we've just seen it in the pictures in the little film we saw, I think of its wonderful people. I think of a colorful destination where one comes truly close to nature. It is the land, as you know, of Mount Everest. We're always fascinated by that. Earth's highest mountain with a scintillating variety of landscape, architecture, ecology, people, and culture. Nepal has remained a popular destination, and I aim to come back soon for budget tourists as well as extravagant travelers. I had the great luck to travel to Nepal several times. And every time I visit, at first the beauty of the valley awes me before visiting the mountains or lush national parks. We've seen the iconic Buddhist temple of Swayambhuvanath, the famous Hindu temple of Pashupatinath, and the Kashmirian mosque in Kathmandu, all date back to the medieval period and are testimony to centuries of religious coexistence and tolerance. I just learned that there has been never a fight caused by religion. The diversity of languages and cultures time and again fascinates travelers from abroad. The region is such a vibrant, ethnically, religiously, and linguistically diverse region. While about 80% of the population are Hindus, Nepal is also home to a sizable number of Buddhists, Muslims, and Christians, among others. And more than 120 tongues are spoken in Nepal. In the European Union, for example, as a whole, the more than 500 million inhabitants speak only a slightly higher number of tongues. And it is sometimes good to look beyond your own area where you live and learn from others. And in this case, the EU can certainly take some cues from South Asian countries and especially from Nepal in managing increasing diversity. However, Nepal is also one of the countries most vulnerable to disasters and the impact of global climate change. It was in 2015 when Nepal suffered a devastating earthquake that killed 9,000 people. Despite severe disasters, people in Nepal were able to reconstruct and restoring the local economy, jobs, and livelihoods. Nepalis are resilient and have a positive outlook, striving for a better quality of life. Integrated approaches and innovative partnerships were key to bouncing back after the earthquake. And the disaster has united the country in the face of adversity. We both our countries, Germany and Nepal, have a past that still put challenges to today. We have fought for democracy, and we know that it has to be defended. Nepal has made important steps towards establishing a really, truly representative democracy in which governments are held accountable by strong institutions. It is committed to the same values on which the European Union is built upon and which are at the core of the work of the Friedrich-Naumann Foundation for Freedom. And it is all our task, all of us. We have to maintain strong institutions and transparent democratic rules of governance, even in times of crisis. However, and that was mentioned already, last year onwards, amid a raging pandemic, a looming global economic crisis, and devastating floods and landslides, the Himalayan nation has been in political and diplomatic turmoil over its disputed border with larger neighbors like China and India. The dispute has deepened strains with the current government and reignited debate over the future of Nepal's relations with the two Asian giants. In the face of the rise of these new powers, most notably China, and the withdrawal of old powers, which now might change with the new president in the US, from the established global order, the challenges are manifold. However, we all know that we should not fall back and we should not cut back on multilateral cooperation. Whoever leads Nepal in the years to come will have to manage a geopolitical environment that is only growing in complexity. Such a difficult balancing act requires more than will. It requires political stability at home and consensus among domestic power brokers. Picking up the pieces will not be easy, nor would it be enough. To heal from these back-to-back tragedies, Nepal needs a forward-thinking plan. And that's why I'm looking forward to today's discussion on knowing Nepal's challenges and curious to understand its complexity and way forward. I am optimistic, I'm very optimistic that Nepal will emerge stronger and will contribute towards stronger cooperation among countries in South Asia. Thank you very much. I look forward to the discussion.
Yes, thank you, Ms. Stark-Watzinger, for your opening or for your keynote on today's topic. And I will now hand over to Dr. Vishal Dakal, who will be the moderator for today's discussion. And I have the pleasure to introduce you to him. Dr. Dakal is a social entrepreneur, physician, and healthcare innovation enthusiast. And he has been working away from hospital for the last 12 years and has been building enterprises, firmly believing that technology can bridge the access divide and can help to provide quality healthcare across the world. He's a pioneer in bringing an integrated healthcare platform, Health at Home, the first of its kind in South Asia, to the market. And he mentors and supports local and global startups and acts as an advisor. He's involved in many charity initiatives and services. He's the founder of the Nepal Ventilator Bank and has been helping to make the Nepalese more resilient to this COVID crisis by that. Dr. Dakal is also a columnist on healthcare, contemporary politics, and social issues. Thank you, Dr. Dakal, for agreeing to be the moderator for this evening's discussion. And I'm now handing over the proceedings to you, and I wish all of us an interesting discussion, and I'm looking forward to what you have to say to us.
Thank you, Patrick, and thank you for having me in Friedrich-Naumann Foundation South Asian this talk series, which is a great initiative to bring in conversations very important in this area. I would like to start our panel discussion by thanking Mrs. Bettina Stark-Watzinger and our Consul General Rampatap Thapasar and Dr. Karsten Klein, who coordinated on behalf of FNF South Asia, Nupur Didi, who sits in Delhi and looks after our work, and our partner organization, Samriddhi Foundation team over here. And it's my pleasure to talk about my country, which is, as you saw in a video, as you saw a passionate conversation led by Mrs. Watzinger, sorry about that, our esteemed MP from Bundestag. And then we all are very passionate about our country, which has a great geography. We have a great mountainous and terrain, which is diverse. We have a great population of a culture and creed, that we have a very deep-rooted cultural traditions which never fights, which was also stated. So we don't fight among the religions and things like that. So Nepal actually is a very interesting, diverse, small country, but not that small because it is 30 million population based. It has terrain, if it is surface area wise, if it's spread, it is one of the largest country. It is actually located as one of the most dynamically growing and evolving industrial countries like China and India. It is in between that opportunity that we have not been able to claim from optimistic prospect, but also there is a growing geopolitical situation which integrates and actually it entangles our decision-making processes and complicates everyday life, which is seen more often these days than it was before. So in that note, Nepal has advantages and also has its own nuances, which actually has been a conversation as it was said earlier. Nepal actually has been through this COVID crisis for what we are talking today about this changing scenario on what we are all facing about this global pandemic spread, which actually started in our northern neighbor and actually hit us first in the first wave through our southern neighbor. So it didn't come through a northern neighbor. It's anecdotal, but it actually did travel around the world before it started coming to our home. If you look into that whole spread of the COVID crisis in the first wave, it was very anecdotal that it actually traveled around the world. It went from China to Italy, to Europe, to New York, to Asia, and then to India, then to us. So regardless of that, I think we have quite a bit of experience now, a very bad, very tormenting. I mean, we have a great esteemed panelist like Mayor Dr. Dhawal Samser Rana. He is a two-time mayor in Nepalganj. He is our leader to look up to how a leader in cities are led. He is an exemplary leader who actually runs his program by doing, not by talking. He's also a harbinger of a corruption-less society creation and a leadership role, and he actually stands strong on that. He has a great creed of doing it so by coming in from the Rana family. He has studied very well in India, has been in official positions and have led city with the distinctions. I would say it's very inspiring for our generation to look up those kind of people and personalities. He has been also very active in COVID. He has actually led multiple initiatives by setting up isolation centers. He was hit very hard. His community was hit very hard by COVID, and he had set up, he will tell more about it himself, but I'm just putting on a flow that when we start talking about those things, it actually goes like that. Then he also is a pioneer, because Nepalganj is one of the dynamically growing city. He will tell more about his city. He will talk more about his community, his aspirations around it, the important geopolitical situation he sits in, the opportunity that he sees from his eyes, because he is true son of soil that he has grown. So I'll let his panel discussion to start on that note, but I'll go to my other esteemed panelist, our ex-health minister, who can be more a voice for our side in the COVID crisis than himself. He was an ex-minister and he was in ministerial position from 16 to 17. He is a youth leader from Nepali Congress, and he has been in a forefront of this whole crisis. He has been MP first time and then second time also now, and then he has done quite a bit about work in COVID and then around COVID. He's a World Economic Forum youth leader. He also writes and often about, especially in healthcare, his interests. He has written in Lancet. He has written in other publications which have a global importance. Mr. Thapa, if you talk about him, he's got a great aspirational personality. His orator skill is one of the most talked about in our country. So he is one of our most dynamic political leaders that we look up to from our generation. Anecdotally, I was his school's 2-year junior student, so I know quite a bit about how he has evolved. And I still vote for him because I live in the same community. So on that note, that is our introduction to Mr. Thapa. And he belongs to Nepali Congress, and Dr. Dhawal Samser Rana belongs to RPP, which is Rashtriya Prajatantra Party, as a general secretary. We have another panelist, Mrs. Suhasini Haider. She's a very renowned South Asian journalist, media personality. We don't have to, actually in South Asia, she's pretty good and well known. She used to be in a CNN when it was 94, I think. She worked from UN. Then she moved on to India and worked on CNN, IBN. She even had an accident in Kashmir. She's a very prominent diplomatic affair commentator, writer, and a personality who actually writes on diplomatic affairs, now sitting in Delhi for the Hindu publication. She also has a deep interest in diplomatic affairs. She reports prominently on South Asian and regional affairs. She has traveled around the world, and she will be joining shortly because she's on the way. So she will also talk about our, oh, she's already there. All right, okay, glad to see you, man. I hope I'm talking all right, okay? So, and then she's gonna talk about our geopolitical situations and the things that we have in our in our regional level, and then probably how a multilateralism, as our Bettina talked about earlier, that we should also have a balance or find balance on a multilateral engagements. All right, on that note, I'll start up today's evening conversation. I would like to request, we have a flow of conversation on local, regional, and then we go on a global issues. So on local, I would really like to start with our esteemed mayor on how he thinks COVID has been for us, for him, for his community and his country. What has been his experience? That probably will roll up to all three of you guys.
Thank you, Dhakal sir, Doctor. Good evening once again, everybody. I'm very glad and very honored to be here in such company of such highly esteemed people from Germany, Nepal, India. And now I would like to get straight away to the point. I'm not too much of a, I don't give too much time to introductions. I would say when this COVID came around, it came to us pretty late. And at one point, we in Nepal thought it wouldn't touch us because we were seeing news all over the world. It started in Europe, then America and South America, China, India, and it hadn't touched us. So there was this false hope and false confidence that somehow we Nepalese people were quite resilient to this disease. And at one point, it all started from my city. One person was infected. And the next day we had 23 other infection cases. And then my city, Nepalganj, became an hotspot. And it was, we had a curfew here. And in the beginning, people were not even ready to take a swab test. Everything was new to us. And literally, me and my deputy mayor had to go in front of a television program and get ourselves tested just to make sure that other people would follow suit. And it was a while before we could control the first phase. It was bad. It started off in my city and then it went across all over the country. And then this city of ours is a border city with India. And with Uttar Pradesh, that's a huge state in northern India. That's the industrial belt of India. And when the COVID infection hit India, we have lakhs of millions of people working in India. And they would all come back to their homes naturally. In the beginning, the government was not sure what to do. So we tried to stop people at the border, which was very, very unfortunate. India and Nepal, we got into an agreement of keeping the citizens of both these countries within our own borders. So we were quarantined. We had quarantines for Indian citizens, and India had quarantines for Nepalese citizens. And it was pathetic on both sides. Then a situation arose that we could not handle quarantine of different countries, citizens of different countries in our neighbor countries. So we brought in our own people and made our quarantine, place with tents on the border, which is again very pathetic. You have hundreds of people, your citizens, living in tents who are already into their country after a very, very harsh journey in India. People, even walked, I believe, from Bombay. That's about, I would say, 5,000 kilometers. I don't know how they did it. they walked, they took lifts, whatever transport, mode of transport they could find. And when they would come to the border, we had to quarantine them when they were inside out in their own country. So it was not a very, very nice situation. But then the government had taken a decision, the central government had taken a decision, and we could do nothing about it. And even after the quarantine days, say 14 days, the quarantine was over. Even after that, we could not get permission from the central government to send these people home. And even we tried it, and there was a lot of hullabaloo. People were not happy. They were agitating. And it takes a long time for the government to react to a certain situation. That's one of our problems in Nepal. The districts are facing a problem. We have to go through the administrative, the channel to the Home Ministry. The Home Ministry has to put the problem in the cabinet, and the Prime Minister has to decide what to do. And by the time he decides on what to do, the situation has already changed at the ground level. So it was pretty bad. After 7 days, 14 days, and then 7 days, these people were allowed to go home. And it was very, very, it was very, very heart-tearing.
Mr. Mayor.
After all that time, that was the wave. Do I keep on with the second wave, or should we let everybody else, put their thoughts on the first wave?
Mr. Mayor, can you talk about some activity? In 30 seconds, you got to pitch in. What kind of activity that you think was taken by you and your team that actually you think was very helpful? Just in a short, precise, and then we're going to move up to Gagan Thapa and move on further here.
Yeah, when the first wave came, nobody knew nothing about this disease or what was supposed to be done. So it was all, we would go into the media, what was being done in Europe, what was being done in China, and everybody who had their own say. And it was a difficult time, really. Nobody was sure what was this and what was to be done. Right. So, but definitely, we were having these tests, this RTG test, right, which over time, people said it was useless. Then this PCR thing came in. We didn't have enough equipment for the PCR test. So there was a lot of confusion, and nobody was clear about what should have been done. But the municipality, its health workers, the police, the administration, the army, we all moved in, and we were hosting people, we were feeding people, we were sending people to their own districts, we were quarantining people. So it was learning through experience, the first wave.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. On that note, we will move on to Mr. Thapa. Will you please what kind of efforts by you and your team? This is for MP Gagan Thapa. So if he can light on how he sees effort by him and his team that really thinks was impactful and something that is here to share, and his experience on a two wave of COVID, first and second wave, please.
Thank you, Dr. Vishal. Thank you, FNF, for this wonderful opportunity. This is indeed an honor. And I'd also like to recall at this point of time my training with FNF. It was, I believe, in 2003 in Saarbrücken. So thank you again for having me in this wonderful panel. I also have a similar experience as Dr. Dabble just shared, but as working as a parliament member at the national parliament. So my work was a bit different. As soon as COVID was declared a pandemic, I, along with other parliamentarians, registered a motion of public importance in Parliament regarding preparedness. And the motion was very specific about identifying the gaps and also about our challenges, the way forward that was discussed in Parliament, and provided directives for the management of the pandemic. And throughout the first wave, I lobbied extensively within and outside the Parliament to pressurize the government, to raise the questions, and also to provide some suggestions prioritizing COVID management. As an elected representative of my constituency, I worked with the local government and help them to provide testing, tracing, and also provide basic medical equipments to the local health centers. As you remember, Dr. Akal, as at the very, very beginning, we didn't even have some, basic PPE suit and all other basic things in our health centers. And also, I think there was something to share here, that I tried to provide the masks, sanitizers, and the most important thing was information later to each and every household in my constituency, mobilize the volunteers, and also mobilize the stakeholders, different associations, and use my social media extensively to provide informations and also to challenge some disinformation and misinformation regarding the COVID. Regarding second wave, I continued my role as a parliamentarian as in the first wave, and I also again used social media extensively to increase awareness. But second wave, there are two things which I would like to share at this very beginning. One, as to support them, the hospitals were overrunning, there were a high number of cases. So my office partnered with Health at Home, you know that, Dr. Akal, that, and to provide counseling to COVID patients who are staying in home isolation. So far we have crossed around 2,500 patients, and I'm very happy to share that with my team, with the team at Health at Home. So we fill that gap. We are also working with the local governments, but around 2,500 people staying in home isolation are getting our services. We have helped number of patients who in fact required hospital care at the very right time. We also helped number of patients to stay in home instead of, otherwise they would have rushed to the hospital in that panicking situation. And also we partnered with the local government to establish a 25-bed isolation center and transportation service for COVID patients. Our isolation center was fully equipped. We hired medical doctors, nurses, and also provided services to number of patients in my constituency. As the cases that are now decreasing, the plan is to now convert this isolation center to a post-COVID illness management center. So these are the things which I have worked with local government, I put into two categories. One, as a member of parliament within the parliament, working with the federal government. My duty is to raise issues and also to put pressure on the government, and also help government to identify the real issues. And the other, as elected representative of my constituency, I work with the local governments. I work with other partners to engage directly with my constituents. So that was the work I did.
Thank you, Mr. Thapa. That was enlightening, and I'm part voter for you, and I'm part volunteer for you too. But at the same time, I also have a great stories coming out from Nepalgans. I'm going back to Dr. Rana, and I have a question. There was a very big surge, which actually started in Nepalgans. And then there was a huge crisis that was hit because there was a first hit of the second wave majorly on that belt, in particularly Nepalgans, that crumbled the whole healthcare system. And you rose up to that occasion. Let me channelize that question. Will you please tell us briefly about how you did maneuvers where the oxygen supplies were short, and then there was like a whole crisis on Nepalgans, and then you think you did amazing things, and then will you tell in shortest format like how it was done, and then I'll move on to Swasini to learn about something that will happen in India.
Okay, Dr. Takal, I'll try to make it short. The second wave was very, very deadly here. Again, it hit us first in the country, right. And we were overwhelmed with people getting sick and people dying. There were no beds in the hospital. There was always a dearth of oxygen. And then in my city, there are two oxygen factories which produce cylinder oxygen. And they had to supply for 24 districts in mid-western and far western region. And it was a very, very, very sad state where we had our hospitals full. We didn't have enough oxygen for our own patients. And we had to also look after nearly over 20 districts, which would rely on oxygen from my city. So it was very, very tough. I mean, we knew people were dying in other districts too. People were dying in my hospital, in our hospitals. we would have an average death of 15 to 20 people every day. And we would have to, there was no place in the hospital. We used tents, we used the verandas. It was a bad state. And then the municipality, the wards, we started making isolation centers with oxygen. And then this new thing came in, oxygen concentrators. We hadn't heard of them. And and we got some oxygen concentrators from the government, from donors. And slowly the situation eased. And then our main hospital, the Bheri hospital, got an oxygen tank, which came quite late in the day, but it did come. And slowly over time, say over time of 1 month, 1.5 months, we got things under control. And as of today, we have some deaths, but these deaths are not from our districts. What really happened there is when people would get, COVID infected, they would, in various districts surrounding our city, they would try medication there in their home districts. And when the situation got out of control or the disease was getting fatal, then they would come into our city. There was nothing we could do. It was too late. So we've had about over 350 deaths from outside our city and outside our state, and about 320 from within our districts. So we got more than 50% of people, the death rates, more than 50% of people who died here were people from the surrounding districts. And we couldn't say no. There was no space in the hospitals, but people were coming. And you can't just turn people back. We were accepting people from all over 24 districts, when we were overfull ourselves. So it was a difficult time. But we got through it. The municipality sent in lots of health workers. Then the ministries also kicked in, and we employed over 150 health workers. The other hospitals also started working as COVID hospitals, and we did get things under control. But it took us 1.5 months, and after many people died, actually.
Absolutely admiring work that you have done. I mean, as a doctor, I really passionately follow what you all been doing there.
Thank you.
That tank was a relief, I know. I move on to India now. I mean, we have Suhasini there waiting for a while, and then I think she is now cool off. Will you tell us some stories about some local heroics that has happened in India, which my leaders would like to hear about, or our regional or our international friends would like to hear about some great things that has happened in India. Absolutely, India is a big country, and I'm aware about a few of the stories. Can you tell quickly about that? Yeah, thank you.
Certainly.
Welcome.
Thank you, and thank you for having me on this discussion. It's not often one gets to speak in this kind of context where we actually exchange stories within South Asia. We have made ourselves, in a sense, very insular in terms of thinking that our problems are just ours. But in fact, I think if there's one thing COVID has taught us, is that these kind of calamities really know no borders. And the solutions, therefore, I mean, I do feel disappointed that we have not actually worked as closely together on shared solutions, shared experiences as we should have. But it's important that we're having this discussion today. I hope there will be more, because we know one thing, and that is that we can never let our guard down in terms of another wave, another type of pandemic, another kind of calamity that could hit us. And the truth is that South Asia will be affected as a unit. Dr. Rana said something so true, which was that you look at somebody else's problems and you say, well, maybe it's not going to hit me, or maybe I'm actually stronger than others. Each of us have been guilty of holding that belief. And each of us have found that we actually are all the same when it comes to our vulnerabilities. The timing may be different. The last 9 days of April are seen as the days of hell in Delhi. And in order to tell you a little bit about the positive stories we have seen, one has to understand the nature of the challenge that hit us. We were in a situation around the country where on one single day, like on May the 1st, I think, we had 4 lakh new cases around the country. in just a short period of a week in Delhi, the last week of April, 3,000 people died, and that's the numbers that were recorded. We all know that the numbers are far higher. It's just that, you know, some people just were not recorded in the same way. And if you were to try and understand how much worse the situation was than on a normal day, basically the kind of deaths we saw at that time, the kind of casualties we saw at that time were 250 times what is normally seen within that time period. So it was a challenge of huge proportions. I don't think I'm giving any secret away by saying we had a definite issue with governance, both at the state level and the central level. It was a very overwhelming problem. One of the big problems, and I think both Dr. Rana and Mr. Thapa spoke about, was the shortage of oxygen. Some of it was panic-driven, some of it was the actual fact. Hospitals were shutting down their ICUs because they didn't have access to oxygen. Others did have oxygen, but they didn't have patients. So one of the great experiences we had, and I can tell you, there was a period for about 2 weeks where I literally woke up in the morning, and you know, it's strange that we found that just as politicians must have been fielding so many calls from people, so were journalists, because we're there on Twitter, we're seen as public personalities. And so we were constantly getting asked for help. And what were the kinds of things people needed? They needed access to a hospital bed. They needed oxygen. If not possible in a hospital, then at home, an oxygen cylinder or an oxygen concentrator. There was a point at which blood plasma was being seen as a part of the treatment. So there was a shortage of that. There were things, medicines like remdesivir, that cost quite a lot and were being sold at much higher prices. Those were being needed. And finally, what actually a lot of people were coming to us with were, you know, issues of just even getting normal medicines, normal fever medicines. Everything was in short supply. So you're looking at shortages on all kinds. But there were a lot of people who were willing to help. So one of the great initiatives I saw was where regular people and the authorities worked together. So in Gurgaon, which is just outside Delhi, for example, they had a combined central control room. And what that control room was doing was looking, A, at what hospitals had beds available, and B, you know, other things, like I said, blood and plasma and oxygen, whatever was needed specifically. And they built a complete control room. This was a pilot project last year, which was headed actually by a former journalist who was able to put it together. And they were able to very quickly tell people over a WhatsApp chat bot, what are you looking for? Here it is. This is where you should go. This is your closest hospital. This is what we can offer you. So essentially the problem of just matching those who really needed help and those who were able to provide it but didn't have the same kind of rush as other places, that was one very, very important place. The other thing I think I saw, and those are really, you know, apart from the daily, the healthcare workers, the frontline workers that were working 36, 48 hours without a break. I think what we saw also was how ordinary citizens got together. And even at a time when there was such a fear of the pandemic, people who are willing to volunteer to provide food, for example. So one of the great volunteer services we saw were people who organized food for the family members of people who were in hospitals, because hospitals were off limits. You couldn't go and sit with family members who had COVID. So they were waiting essentially outside the hospitals. So, you know, there was a sense of people just coming together to help despite the dangers to them, because after all, each person who stepped out of their home was in danger. The third thing we saw was, tents being put up in different parts of the capital, for example, where people were given short boosts of oxygen, which would help them at least, improve their oxygen saturation levels until such time as they were able to get hospital beds. It sounds hard to imagine the kind of situation I'm describing over here, but we did all live through it. And to see people come out. I remember there was one person we were trying to get plasma for at a time when doctors thought plasma actually was helping. And these were volunteers who literally were willing to walk into a hospital after having had COVID and then give their plasma or give their tests for blood. So I would say when it comes to heroes, I don't think, a situation like that can be helped by any one human being. But I think it is when societies decide really to do something to help others, even at the risk to themselves. That's something that we saw very closely. Certainly, I'm talking about Delhi, where I am, but we saw it in every city where, people just came out, particularly at a time when, to be honest, we felt kind of abandoned by governments. We felt that there was no one place we could call and receive help. Local representatives, of course, we saw them out there trying to help as much as they can. But we also know that there were only so many hospital beds. There was only so much oxygen. There were only so many medicines. And those all were in short supply for that brief period. I think having lived through this, and I'm seeing Mr. Thapa shake his head as well. We've all seen very different. Having lived through this, I think if we do not, as South Asians, as people on the subcontinent, look for common solutions and work out ways in which we can help each other, cross boundaries as well, I think we are giving up a huge opportunity and we're letting all ourselves down.
Thank you. That's so, the way Delhi was suffering, we were suffering. And we were suffering, which means as a physician, I was saying it's going to come in through air and through land because we are still open. As Dr. Rana must be thinking, had it been a little bit more, contained border control, and Mr. Thapa must be thinking like, had we just locked down our country 2 days earlier than what we did. So it's so connected, our reason, our just relations are so bonded. In that note, I would really like to touch upon the next phase of our conversation. It's about a governance. I mean, I think we all saw a common man's heroism. There was nothing called, doctor would have done it alone. And one thing, in a sideline, I would say, Mr. Thapa actually led the second wave in such a way that none of the household which had a positive was left alone. That's something to be talked about. I would let that to come out later in the show. But his constituency didn't have a single person who didn't have access to oxygen, to devices, to volunteers, to support during COVID positive. Remarkable story that we would like to hear about it more. But then I would like to go to Dr. Rana and then ask about how was the governance? I know you are not very happy with I can hear it in the earlier statement that the district government was hustling with federal government was hustling with the central government. How was this? And I know you wrote an article a long time back in the Nepali Times, which is a prominent English journal, where you talked about federalism and you're a big voice for the federal structure and decentralization in this country, which is very appreciable. But how was your experience in a federal structured country now we have? And how had it been? Had it been a failure, and how you look forward? I would give you all panelists to have at least 2-minute rundown on this statement, and then we'll move on forward. Thanks, sir. To you.
Thank you, Dr. Dhakal. On this note, I would say that the federal structure failed miserably. Even the union structure failed miserably. They were not prepared for what was there. Actually, nobody was prepared. But there was a big confusion, and in the beginning, there was no proper even protocol, what was supposed to be done. And there was a dearth of funds, there were dearth of oxygen, dearth of machines, dearth of medical staff. And the different tiers of government seemed confused. They were not clear. We at the ground level, everybody was working very hard here. But we could not get prompt responses from the federal government or from the union government, which was actually very sad. We were told to do things without the financial backup to do those things. That was one major problem in the first wave. But when we came around to the second wave, the government had adapted to the situation more, better, and there was more response, there was more funds, and there was better coordination between the three tiers of government in the second wave than the first wave.
I remember
And
one thing that you actually were the first one to lock down in your own jurisdiction.
actually, yes, both the times, in the first wave and the second wave, we were unfortunate to be hit first, and on both occasions we acted very promptly by locking down.
Had it
That
been a federal state, you wouldn't have done it yourself.
But talking about this border issue, there's no way we can stop Nepalese citizens from coming into Nepal from India, or Indian citizens going into India from Nepal, because the border is so porous, it's so open. We have thousands of kilometers of open border. Villages are divided in half of the villages in India, half the villages in Nepal. So there's no way we can stop people, and it's inhuman to stop people from getting back to their families. It's so very, very actually difficult. Very easy to say, shut your border, shut your, stop people coming. But it's not a question of 100 people or 1,000 people. It's a question of a million people moving across the border.
Yeah.
So that is.
Thank you, Dr. Rana. I would move to Mr. Thapa, and I would ask, you are also prominent figure who talks about federal state structures and decentralization. What has been your experience on all this great effort that you all have put in a pocket areas, or you have lobbied in a central government level? I mean, I have watched multiple videos of yours on a talk about how government should lead the testing, how government should lead the approach to the lockdown and where. So all these things, how has been a central government role on your lobbying side, and then on your civic duty side? How has they been?
I don't want to sound very negative, but I would like to share my observation about some major lapses in the preparedness of the management of COVID from the government. The first I would say is, unfortunately, the approach toward the pandemic was very reactive rather than proactive. I remember my meeting with the former health minister. It was some 12 months back in a chamber, when I had presented a document where I had identified the need to invest in our oxygen plants, as I had experience of serving as a health minister, even though it was a very brief period. But I knew the importance of it. I had worked with few hospitals, and I also gathered some data with consulting with a number of other experts. So at that time, it was some 12 months. I'm talking about 12 months back. So had he listened to me or the suggestions from experts, and it was not about resources, it was not about money. We were full of resources at the time. So it was about the intent. It was about the decision. It was about believing in science. It was about believing in evidence and data. Then Nepal, for that matter, be it Nepalganj or Kathmandu, wouldn't have cried for oxygen. We would have saved a number of lives. And again, talking about the same oxygen thing, when the second wave hit India, so at the time, Nepal was lucky to get around some 30 to 45 days of window. So forget about 12 months. Had we started investing on the oxygen thing at the very beginning of the second wave, again, we didn't need to wait for oxygen concentrators, or we didn't need to wait for some assistance from our friends abroad. We had money, we had time, we knew the need, but we didn't act. So that was we were very, very reactive rather than proactive. I mean, the leadership, unfortunately, the leadership discarded the scientific evidences and dwelled on baseless information. which spread misinformation among the people, as Dr. Rana at the very beginning shared that it was not common people. It was the senior leaders who believed and would made others believe that we Nepali are specials. And we had the resistance, we had this immunity. So, I mean, number of those things which would have done, which we would have done if we had done that differently. I believe that things would have been very, very different. And just would like to touch one or two lines on this federal government thing. So, I mean, the federal government, my observation was that, as Dr. Rana said, that it was unable to have a meaningful discussion with the local governments and the provincial governments. I mean, the federal government was supposed to act and think like a federal government, not a central government. We had 7 provinces. We have some 753 local governments. So you have to partner with them. You are not, I mean, you are not a boss who can just give directions and orders, and there are some others to follow it. So, I mean, you were supposed to bring them on board, on same page, discuss with them, agree on something, and then clarify your roles. So I think that, that was something we need to do, but we failed to do that.
All right. So moving, of course, like there's not much of a bright light, so we have a lot of crisis. That's one of the things that's why the pandemic has been a testing time, especially for the young federal state that we have as a Nepal, which actually just come out of that whole structuring and constitution that you all fight for, or we fought for. And then now suddenly the COVID has actually shaken us so much that even the strongest proponent of like the people who advocated for it are feeling vulnerable. Will it actually work? And on that help, that the confidence of the authoritarian regimes are actually moving ahead with their confidence, which actually destabilizes that whole sense of independence or the people's freedom of expressions. And those kind of things are actually coming out of those kind of situation. On that note, I would like to understand the broader understanding from Suhasini. How does it look, looking at the federal structures in the region, in a South Asian perspective? Has it been a successful model for India or other states that you think, or is there any note of comment for us or our leaders to understand, and then where it was failing and where it could have gone right? And in a precise, I think like we also have a time bound, and I think like it's a great, I mean, it's gonna go for 4 hours. I tell you, like this is such a nice conversation happening. It's so close to our heart. Suhasini, it's yours. Thanks.
I'll tell you very quickly that, it was a case of lessons not being learned from the first wave from last year. I think it was a case of this famous saying that, success has many fathers and failure is an orphan. Because what happened in India between April 15 and May the 15th, which was the worst part of the second wave, and what is now being called the Delta variant was spreading very quickly through the country, was that nobody wanted to take responsibility for what was clearly a very, very difficult situation. And without going into the politics of it, I think we saw how badly, federal and state relations could get, where in the middle of all the deaths, there was still a blame game going on about who was responsible. Now, there were several parts to this. The first part, of course, was who was responsible for not having seen the second wave coming. So there was a lot of shifting of the blame to where that should really lie. If you remember, we had a very big gathering in April of in March and April of the Kumbh in Hardwar, which eventually led to an uptick in cases. We also saw elections going on. In fact, elections were going on till May 1st in 5 different states. So even there, the state-center relationship was actually just being overrun by the politics between them. The third thing was, the second part of it. So the first part was the fact that nobody wanted to take responsibility for what had happened and how they had not seen the numbers growing, even though numbers we know now were growing from middle February onwards. The second part where we saw the state-center relations really just break down was over the supply of oxygen. And this became a big factor, particularly in a state like Delhi, but in other states as well, where they were not getting the oxygen that was required. And if you remember, at one point, India was basically took help from the entire world, I think from Nepal as well. Bhutan sent us oxygen. And it wasn't just a shortage of oxygen, but oxygen containers. So suddenly you were having, oxygen containers being airlifted from Singapore to India. This was, essentially a very, very strange situation where we had the oxygen required, but we were not able to get it to people in time. It is one thing if you die of an illness. It is another thing if you die because you could not get access to healthcare. But the biggest tragedy I think that many people faced was that they took their loved ones to a hospital and they died there because the hospital ran out of oxygen in the ICUs. And while one can't minimize any of these tragedies, the truth is there is something very cruel about the idea that someone was inside a hospital and could not get something as basic as the oxygen required over there. So the second part was about which state should have how much oxygen at a certain time. It also led to a new situation between the federal and state structure where one state was fighting another. So we had a situation where I was speaking to a hospital which had sent its tankers. The tankers were bringing oxygen over, but those tankers were stopped at the state border because the state they were leaving said, no, they can't leave. This oxygen belongs to us. So in a situation of shortage, you also see how badly, if there is a lack of good federal and state relationships and state relationships, how badly the situation can get. Instead of helping people out, essentially oxygen tankers were just standing at borders, not helping anyone at all.
Absolutely,
and the third part,
absolutely.
and I don't think we've gotten to it yet, was the distribution of vaccines, where again there was another problem between the state and the state. I'm sorry, I don't have any positive stories for you on this account. But the truth is that we did see a real breakdown. I think if there's something for us to learn, I'm talking about South Asia getting together. I think in India, we really do have to learn about how to ensure that the center and the states are able to work, towards a common goal, rather than what we saw where we should learn by example of what never to do again.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you on that. But then also we have a more deeper tiering conversations coming up, which is going to be on a regional collaboration, bilateral relations, and multilateral relations that we have to maintain. On that thing, I think I'm going to start with Dhaval sir. Regional partnership and support was a big issue during COVID. And also, I'll come to Gagan sir again. And then Nepal is situated between India and China and has very few access outside of the world. Outside the world, we have to go through China and India. There's no other way for us. The relation between two countries, South Asian countries partnership, and a broader support network globally was in testing times during this crisis. Our relief supply coordination, our vaccines, medicines, and scientific community partnerships are non-existent yet. How do you think our regional and broader multilateralism worked in favor of us or against us?
Thank you, Dr. Saab. Everything collapsed actually, and still it has been in that state. I would start from now. India provided us with the COVID vaccine. We did get a certain number, I think 10 lakhs. Many people in this country got their first shots, and suddenly the central government in India decided not to send vaccines outside the country. I think, if I'm right, you would know, ma'am, until people in India were vaccinated. So suddenly, our country ran out of the second shot, and our citizens are waiting for the second shot, which is not going to come from India as far as we know, because the parliament has, or I think it's the parliament or the judiciary has stopped India from exporting or selling the vaccine, which is so very sad. Our people have got the first shot, and there's no certainty of getting the second shot because our neighbor has refused to sell or send us more of it. That's where it stands as of today. Now from China, we did get a certain amount of vaccines, and we are going to buy certain amount of vaccines from there. And you know, vaccine politics is going on everywhere in the world. This is in short supply. It was at one point, there was no mask in the world. No, there was no oxygen. Now there's no vaccine. So any country, it's understandable. If you produce the vaccine, you would make sure that your people would get it first before you export it to somebody else. Even from one state to another, like I heard ma'am saying, even oxygen tankers were stopped. Now, it's understandable, we are all humans, and every nation looks after its own public first. They would definitely need to vaccinate their own people before they would sell the vaccines or you know, donate it to a second country, which is very sad. There are organizations which is supposed to be you know, giving these vaccines all across the world, which is not really working. Our people are waiting for vaccines. They are not being able to get it. The government has failed absolutely on these terms. And I believe even when there's an organization called Himalayan Trust, they wanted to bring some vaccine, the Johnson & Johnson vaccine from the United States through the vice president. They have some kind of connection there. They were not allowed to bring these vaccines. They were not given a letter to, you know, bring these vaccines because the government wanted to buy vaccines. So the trust asked us, the municipality, to, you know, provide them with a letter so that the American government would send us vaccines, and we have done that. I don't know if they will be able to bring it or not, but as of now, the vaccine situation in Nepal is in dire straits. From China or India, we are not getting very, very positive, you know, answers or help on this term. And I think it's understandable. In crisis, I like say, we were producing oxygen, and at one point, we even sent oxygen across the border when we could. But when the situation got very grave here, we had to stop it. There was so much public pressure that, you know, our districts were not getting oxygen, and there's no way we could send oxygen to India.
Right.
I guess.
So there's a crisis after crisis, like oxygen tanks been hoarded from here to there. I mean, you know, all these things.
It started from a dearth of masks across the world, and now it's a dearth of vaccines across the world.
Yeah. So, Mr. Thapa, can you enlighten us in how these things fail? Because you've been in a position of ministry, and then you know how these power centers move and how bilateral, multilateral partners are there who advises are all the time. And it's been crisis, and how they stood for us. I mean, has there been an action which is cohesive to say the friends were there for us when it was needed?
Just to add on what Dr. Dhaval Satrana had just shared with us, India is not either they are selling or sending. China is there. We have heard that government has now entered into some sort of agreement, but so far, if you see the number, I mean, it's again so less. So we are in between two giant neighbors. We're so proud of it, but I mean, if you see the number, if you see their size and see the number of the vaccines, I mean, we're sorry to say that we are not very proud of being in between these two giant neighbors at this point of time. And we're getting so many promises from our good friends. We are very thankful to them that, I mean, we are getting financial support and a number of other things from multilateral platforms. But what good are those if we cannot find ourselves a supplier of vaccine at this very, current crisis? So this is a time where Nepal desperately needs vaccine. I mean, we will be thankful to anyone. So, I mean, I may sound very harsh, but we don't need oxygen concentrators. We don't need oximeters. We don't need PPE suits. I mean, what we need is vaccines. I mean, anyone who can come forward, provide us, or even can sell us, that is what we need at this point of time. And then when we talk about this, as you raised this, about this regional structure, I mean, what I believe is that we have in South Asia, particularly SAARC or BIMSTEC, they have never been a powerful or even influential source to be trusted, even in normal time. right? So I don't think that otherwise this weak organizational structure of SAARC is designed to anticipate or even work on this any form of crisis. So, I mean, for this reason, it would be very wrong to expect anything from this sort of regional structure. Here in South Asia, we don't have any functional sort of regional structure. That is, and when you say South Asia, we are there on a map. We sometimes think as we are South Asian, but there is nothing any kind of formal, very functioning sort of structure that we all are part of. So there's no this sort of regional thing, and we are trying to get best out of our relations with particularly with India, with China, and with as well as with other neighbors as well.
Thank you. In that note, I think the Suhasini will be the best person to highlight us. She works in this whole spectrum, this is amazing countries. So vaccine diplomacy at its best and how Nepal should play its card. It's a recommendation. I think you got an expert hand in there. And in both neighbors' condition, and even with other interest parties from across the world, how should we pitch them? It seems like we don't have a voice, we're so helpless, like in every sort of things that we have to kind of go about it and whatever they give. And what is our strategic thing that you think we should play from a strength point of view? And, I was preparing for this because you all are stalwarts in your own community and your leadership. So I was looking at the whole content on the vaccine diplomacy that the Bhutan actually bought it from China. And then India kind of committed for the second dose. Even to Bhutan, they couldn't supply. It means Nepal is second line after Bhutan, definitely in their diplomatic spectrum. And then there was a whole crisis about India giving vaccines to 95 other countries and not preparing themselves for their second wave. I'm taking another 5 minutes. I think we are running out of time. But I quickly would like to ask this question embedded with essence of SAARC. On that note, I will close this whole panel discussion and we'll move on to Q&A. But Suhasini, please go ahead on this. Enlighten us, please, on this.
Sure. And in fact, the greatest sorrow, if you ask me, is that we actually began the right way. Last year in March, it was India that chaired a SAARC meeting and began the idea of discussing COVID in South Asia and in that SAARC format. But the fact was that we didn't do our homework after that. And I'm not blaming just India, I'm saying around South Asia. We didn't do basic homework that said, when Mr. Thapa was asking about where are the vaccines, the truth is that even in India, which prides itself as the highest vaccine, biggest vaccine manufacturer in the world, there was not a basic back of the envelope calculation. How many vaccines do we have? How many are committed? How many will we have access to month upon month? And how many should we be giving out? As a result of not having this kind of basic thing, and let's be honest, countries across South Asia didn't make the plans they should have. There were some orders that were put in. I can tell you, the Indian government's orders didn't really come through until January and actually properly paid up in April of this year. So there wasn't that kind of real planning, because I think somewhere there what Dr. Rana said was true, that somewhere there we felt in the subcontinent that this was not a disease that had hurt us as much. Every part of South Asia that I spoke to, people said, the truth is our hospitals are not overrun. Our graveyards are not overflowing. This is essentially something that's happened in China. It's happening in Europe. Oh, look at how badly New York is doing. But at the end of the day, we sort of thought we were immune to this, and we just weren't, but we didn't plan in advance. As far as India goes, yes, 95 countries were sent vaccines, some of them through exports, some of them because they were, commercial exports, some of them were government-to-government grants, and some of them were part of the COVAX alliance, which, let's be honest, the COVAX alliance had actually, it was on the basis of our commitments to the COVAX alliance that Serum Institute was chosen to produce the AstraZeneca vaccine. Given all of that, the truth is, had we stuck to what we had started, which is to say SAARC is our basic unit. If South Asia is taken care of when it comes to the vaccine, then at least we can say that we are not a threat to the world, that all of South Asia has been vaccinated. We actually possibly would have been in a much better position. We didn't take that chance. We didn't take that choice. Instead, India was exporting to Brazil, it was exporting all over the world. Of course, we did start with the neighborhood. We started with Bhutan and Nepal and Bangladesh, but it doesn't help, as Dr. Rana said, if you give the first vaccine and then you don't get to the second vaccine. It might just be that we are all saved by one study in Oxford that came out yesterday that now says that the best gap between two doses is 10 to 11 months. But that would just be, serendipity. That would not be strategy. It would not be SAARC strategy, certainly, and it would not require planning. Even today, and no, Bhutan has not got its second dose from China. So Bhutan has got its first doses from India. Its deadline is running out because it has given itself a 16-week gap. Its deadline is running out in the next 2 weeks. I understand that they are likely to get some help from Europe, but it shouldn't have been like this. It should have been essentially a South Asian effort to say, if we protect ourselves, if we ring fence ourselves, because remember, so whatever you might want to say about SAARC and whatever you might want to say about South Asia, we are a geographic entity as much as we are anything else. We are bounded on one side by the Indian Ocean. We are bounded on the other side by the Himalayas and the Hindu Kush. So the fact is, if we were able to protect this geographic entity of South Asia by vaccinating everyone in time for the second wave that came in April, which is of course now all in hindsight that I'm speaking, we actually had a much better chance. Not so many lives would have had to be lost after.
So in that, can I add on a little bit more your enlightenment? Is it a diplomacy of India still needs a little bit of homework because there is non-existing strong SAARC model or whatever regional cooperation model, so that we can at least on a humanitarian ground, we can collaborate on those kind of calamities. We don't have even a basic understanding of the humanitarian crises that unfolds and doesn't mind boundaries, because we have Kosi flood right now hitting on Bihar. We have other landslides that's stroking in Nepal. We have a lot of those kind of calamities which actually counts accountable process in neighborhood that has not been counted on, be it vaccine, be it other disasters. I think the diplomacy needs a little bit of maturity on that humanitarian ground. What do you think about it?
I'm not sure the diplomacy is the only thing at fault over here. I think eventually you need leadership. You need the ability to see this area as one unit. I think Mr. Thapa is trying to say something as well.
All right, I'll let Mr. Thapa to go ahead.
I was just totally agreeing with what Vasni had just said, that it's a kind of political decision. It's a kind of political commitment.
Right.
So if you have that political commitment as a leader of any of the South Asian country, that I want to see South Asia, functioning as a reason, then all the things will follow. If you don't have that as a commitment, then you can blame anything for that. So just was agreeing with that.
All right. So in that note, we'll move on to
one last point, that there is a challenge for the future as well post-COVID that we're not looking at, and that is how South Asia as a unit is going to be affected economically. Our workers go out to as migrant workers to the Gulf and other areas. An estimated 22% fall in those jobs. As far as internally as well, in terms of tourism as well, which each of our countries is so dependent on for tourism dollars, we are going to see several areas where the economy is going to be hit because of what has happened in the pandemic. There is only one way out of that, and that is for us to really try. I sound like now my journalist hat because I know that this is not a reality right now. And Nepal and India, of course, already have a very open border. But we do need to think about common solutions, whether it is in terms of labor, whether it is in terms of tourism, whether it is in terms of just looking at building the GDP or joint visas and all the rest of that. There has to be a little more understanding that this pandemic has thrown us together. SAARC may have come to an end. It might be moribund after 35 years of not going anywhere. But at the end of the day, this pandemic is reminding us that we are one unit. When we get hit, each of us have gotten hit at the same time.
Absolutely. Let's move on smoothly to question and answer, because I'm going to cut down on the question and answer now because we went a little bit overboard on a session. So I have a very quick question which says, which reform would be tackled in Nepal as the most important one after this crisis? What is the most important priority as a leader? So it goes to Dr. Rana. Quickly on that note, what do you think will be your priority or for a nation to have reinforced, like quickly on that question? And then I'll move to Mr. Thapa, and then we'll take another question. Yeah.
The COVID has taught us that we have to be prepared for any kind of crisis, a pandemic, physical, political, whatever crisis, we should be, prepared firsthand. I would say COVID has prepared us for medical crisis for the future. But on the other hand, Haider ma'am, to quote you, we are not on the same level where SAARC is considered. We do a lot of talking, we do a lot of writing, we do a lot of agreements, but nothing comes down to the ground. There are so many instances between us two countries. We are neighbors, inseparable neighbors. You just can't, draw a line between India and Nepal. There's no real line. It's just a political border. There's nothing between our citizens of the two countries. They can walk freely from one country to another. But government to government, understandings are done, but nothing comes down to the ground. And there's so many instances. I don't have time to go into that. Like say, for example, even this crisis, this COVID crisis, the vaccine crisis, the oxygen crisis, whatever you would say, between our two countries. Now, between Nepal and China, we have this great barrier, the Himalayas, which makes it quite difficult for goods and transport things to come across. But between us and India, we have traditional, everything is joined. Everything is enmeshed. We cannot really, our politics, our physical, structures, our social mobility, everything is entwined. And the two governments have to be able to work together to make things happen. Flood control, people's movement of goods, the custom excise duties. There's so many things which could be done with a simple, clear understanding and goodwill. The problem is with the political leadership. On our side, it's India bashing. And on the other, India side, they always fear Nepalese, proximity to China. So the feeling of distrust between India and Nepal has got to be, done away with if we are to move together and for the prosperity of both the countries and its people.
All right, that's very wide.
Trust has to be built between the leaders of the two nations. Between the people, there's no problem. It's the problem with the leadership. And it's not about the party. Whichever party comes to power, we have the same problem, which we had before that party came to power.
That's a very wise statement from the one who actually faces that right in front of his face. He's right next to the Indian border, so he understands more than any one of us. Actually, we sit in Kathmandu and we have a little bit of different approach, which he agrees at a central level is a little bit far away from the reality. And then in that note, Mr. Thapa, there is two questions. One is to follow up on the same question. What would be your priority right away? And then to look forward beyond COVID. And then there is another thing on the lockdown, how you think about it. Is it effective or not? So you got to answer two questions quickly.
I can go on what would be the things to do after this COVID thing, but I'll be very brief. I would like to refer here at this point, a book I'm just reading, a book from Farid Zakaria. It's about the post-pandemic relations, where he shares the stories of different government who are considered to be successful government in this handling or managing COVID. The thing is that the government which are considered to be liberals or left to the centers. So there are a few government which are considered very successful. But if you put them in this political spectrum, this ideological spectrum, so few liberals are very successful, few left governments are very successful, few center to the right governments are very successful, and few left governments failed, few liberals failed. So the point he has raised is, it's not about the name of the government. it's not about the quantity or size of the government. It's about the quality of the government. It's about how effective is the government, how efficient is the government. So my learning from this whole this COVID thing, and also, I mean, I would like to, if I can, just in any capacity, contribute there to my government, or for that matter, as my role as MP. I mean, I would like to see my government more effective, right? So it's not about, I mean, more effective, and in terms of quality. So which I had mentioned earlier, that I mean, and this will take me to the second question as well. It's not about lockdown is whether effective or not. It's about on what basis you are taking decisions. Are you accountable or not? So Vasini mentioned about the people who have lost employment. So look at the data of the government. How many people have again gone back to this poverty line? How many people have lost their employment? How many students are dropped out of schools? Our education system has already been struggling with this, I mean, this learning crisis. So who have got this online education in the last 1 year? So what about the poor kids? So there are so many issues which we have to tackle. So it's about whether the government is effective or not. It's about whether the government is accountable or not. Yes, there are so many issues. The coming days are not easy. If you look at our tourism, if you look at our agriculture, if you look at our trade, I mean, so there are so many issues. But if there is a commitment, if we have this, I mean, if we can make our government more, when I say government, I'm not just talking about the current government. I'm talking about the political parties as a whole. I'm talking about the provincial government. I'm talking about the local government. I'm talking about my role as well. So if we can have this more effective, more accountable government, then I mean, even with this less resources, even with this all sort of challenges, then I mean, we may be able to find out some solutions to how to address, I mean, the loss in education, how to address the loss in agriculture, how to address the loss in this tourism. So I mean, the coming days are not easy. But if we keep on functioning on the same way, doing same thing again and again and expecting different result is insanity, I believe. Sir Einstein has said this at some point of time, doing same thing again and again, doing same thing again as we did in the first wave, in second wave, and expecting different thing, doing same thing again if third wave comes and then expecting different thing, that would be insanity.
Yeah, on that note, okay. All right. Do you want to add something, Suhasini? I think you're enjoying this conversation. All right. Okay.
I think
we move on. So, Mr. Thapa, would you like to talk about a lockdown and its inefficiency, the way it is mishandled? I mean, the way the government slaps in the lockdown and forgets about it, because the one who has a privilege always has his privilege. The kids are stuck in the room, schools are closed, the vaccination drive is in one sample. What is your thought about it? Like, is it scientific? Like, there's a question from the public, yeah.
Right. If we go back to the day when we started the very first lockdown, it was very well appreciated. I mean, people, in fact, there was a kind of trust. So people thought that, okay, there might be, some reason. That's why government has imposed this lockdown. People followed that, right? But when people found that the government is having that luxury, locking people into literally in their houses and getting into this unwanted, number of this unnecessary political stuffs. So that was my observation as a member of parliament. People lost their trust, and also when we fail to there's also pay proper attention to other things rather than other things than this COVID infections, as Dr. Rana talked about, people walking all the way from Bombay to Nepal. So people had walked from Kathmandu to far west. So who were those people? Who were those people? So the point is that it was not about the lockdown. It was about how we use that time. Lockdown is always about providing you some time. It is about, I mean, it is one of the tools to control infection, but at the same time, that is a time for you where you can, how you use that precious time is the most important thing. So I think that is where we failed in first lockdown as well as in the second lockdown. So now everything is open. So people are scared that at any point of time, government might, even if it's not the government. I mean, as Dr. Rana mentioned about this, I mean, the local governments are not consulted, the provincial governments are not consulted. One fine morning, there will be a meeting of CDOs, and they will say that, okay, from tomorrow onwards, all the shop will be shut down, or from tomorrow onwards, anything. I mean, they are kind of, the CDOs have all these powers, and I mean, you are not communicating to the people that, I mean, your decisions are based on what sort of evidences. So, have you consulted with the local governments? Have you consulted with the other stakeholders? I think that is the issue. I mean, lockdown is sometimes a very, necessary evil. I mean, in this sort of pandemic. But the question is again, but how you use it, whether you use it effectively or not, is the big question, I think.
Right. Thank you. I have one question, I think, for Swasini. Here it comes. COVID is a situation that will push back the whole of South Asia economically. Do you think leadership, India, Nepal, and South Asia has to be more aggressive in their construction approach to avoid Nepal in crisis? It's a little tricky, maybe emotional one, but yes. I mean, is this like how to build in this gap, I mean, how to make a Nepal a more safer kind of zone and how to help it function. So it's from Facebook. Yeah.
I think there should be no doubt in anyone's mind that, and I've heard it from our leadership certainly being said that we're not all safe until everyone is safe, and particularly in this region, that if any part of this region is hurting, all of us will eventually feel that pain, regardless of whether we actually feel any sympathy or not. It will come back for each one of us. What can we do? Now, my point is, and I've made this point in papers, so I don't want to, take up a lot of your time. What is the impact of coronavirus, the pandemic going to be? Of course, we have seen around the world, there are many impacts, right? People are turning more protectionist, for example. There will be much less movement of labor. Right now, we don't have movement of people, let alone getting back to economic activity. So there is going to be less services, there is going to be less movement of people. A third kind of trend, which I think, and then there's going to be what is work from home doing, the fact that you and I are on a seminar like this, whereas in a pre-COVID time, we might have considered meeting in Kathmandu or Delhi. So, costs are going to shift, things are going to become, priorities are going to differ. But one of the overarching trends, I think that's going to come out, is that with a certain distrust of globalization, there is a sense that the pandemic itself is a result of the extreme globalization that meant that, Wuhan was connected directly to Milan or to New York. So there is a distrust now of globalization. There is a distrust of global supply chains, because we have all seen what happens when those global supply chains break down and countries say, I need to keep my material for myself. When there's nationalism of that, protectionism of that kind, or hyper-nationalism of that kind, it is not possible for us to go back to the old, which was each of us living in our own countries. So there's no globalization is weakened, and being hyper-nationalist is certainly not the answer, because we've all become dependent on each other. What is the answer going to be? The answer is going to be regionalization. We are seeing regions working much more closely together. So whether it is the USMC, whether it is Mercosur, whether it is the European Union, okay, minus the UK now, whether it is Central Asia, whether it is the RCEP community of 15 countries in East Asia and Australia and New Zealand, you're seeing regional organizations getting more enmeshed with each other. I think we have to, at some point, see the writing on the wall. I know I sound like a stuck record, But I find it amazing that when the logic for building ways for South Asia to work together, whether it is a combined thing of tourism. For example, both Nepal and India depend on tourism. We have similar faiths, we have similar religious pilgrimages. If we are not able to work together, where we use each other's labor, where we use each other's the markets, try and distribute demand, we are just going to keep, as Mr. Thapa said, insanity is doing the same thing again and again and expecting a different result. Until we see this as everybody's problem in the region and everybody's solution in the region, we are going to do that thing of just going around and around and expecting that if we take care of ourselves alone, that somehow the situation will be better. And it won't.
All right. Okay. In that note, I think the regional cooperation to get more ground, which makes us smile. Dr. Rana is definitely will be happier on a supply chain side. There will be a lot more things to happen because the tourism will happen from that side. I think regional cooperation and all these conversations has been amazing. That our crisis about our own vaccine supply or the crisis management or regional level of cooperation, understanding each other's pain. Very humanizing, very, we are actually very connected community. So I would really like to thank this opportunity created by FNF. And I think personally, I'm a young guy, I learn a lot, and I'm always inspired looking at you guys. And my generation really look up to you all and really look forward to this kind of constructive dialogues. And this kind of opportunities created by those kind of institutions really matters to us. It's been a great learning. It's been a great experience sharing. It's definitely on a history book that we have actually did some kind of a connected conversation. And in that note, I really appreciate your time, thanking you, each of you, for sharing that preparation, that cohesiveness, and being there for Nepal's concern, Nepal's crisis management planning, and all the leadership that you have shown. Thank you, Mayor Rana. Thank you, Suhasini from India and from the world's perspective. And thank you, Mr. Thapa, for being here. And I would like to close my session here. And I would pass it on to next part where Dr. Carsten Klein would close the session. And I really thank my team in Nepal, Samriddhi Foundation, a team in India, which is FNF South Asia, and FNF in general, and FDP's effort to bring these things together. Thank you very much, and good night.
Yeah, thank you so much for this excellent discussion. Thanks to Honorable Mrs. Bettina Stark-Watzinger, Honorable Dr. Ram Pratap Thapa, yeah, dear panelists, Mrs. Haider, Honorable Dr. Thapa, Lord Mayor, Dr. Shamashir Rana, and of course, you being the moderator, Bishal, thank you for this very valued insights, for your comments, for the very engaging discussion, and the very, very many interesting facts we learned about Nepal and beyond. We would like to express our humble appreciation to you with this absolutely unique and quite rare certificates, which we of course hand over to you in person once that is possible again. I also offer my sincere thanks to all of our guests who took their time to attend this online seminar, especially in this time of a game to the European Soccer Championship taking place similarly in London. A special thanks to you, Dipendra Changlagain, Director of Samriddhi. We partner for more than 6 years now, and it was always a very, very good partnership with Samriddhi, and we will definitely continue. And beyond that, Dipendra, thanks for your personal friendship. Thank you, the colleagues in our Friedrich-Naumann Foundation Landesbüro in Hessen and Rhineland-Palatinate, especially its head, Mr. Patrick Walz. Without you, that couldn't happen, especially with our listeners from Germany. Thank you very much, Mrs. Hasija and our dear liberal family members in the Indian office. Nupur, you are always and have been always the motor for this kind of events. So thank you very much. We are very pleased to support, humbly to help Nepalese citizens still fighting the pandemic situation. As we have heard today, you are very welcome to donate to the Deutsch-Nepalische Gesellschaft, and please find more details on our website. As Friedrich-Naumann Foundation in South Asia, we will definitely continue our engagement in Nepal, and together with our partner Samriddhi, will seek for further opportunities to foster deeper relations between both our countries, and what you several times underlined, especially Mrs. Haider and others, in a sub-South Asian context. So thank you very much. I wish you all happiness. Stay good and healthy still during this extraordinary times. Stay safe together with your families. And I now wish you a very, very good night, and personally be very happy to meet you soon in person. Thanks a lot. Bye and good night.